Good evening and welcome to Elmhurst City Hall. In the absence of Mayor Stephen M. Morley as the city clerk, it's my responsibility to call the August 5th, 2013 meeting of the Elmhurst City Council to order. I'll rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I will call the roll to establish that we have a quorum tonight. Gutenkopf.
Here.
Deuter.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Leader.
Here.
Polumsky.
Here.
Graham.
Here.
Hipskin. Absent. York. Absent. Levin.
Here.
Healy. Absent. Honquist.
Here.
Kennedy. Absent. Mulliner. Wagner. Absent. 9 present, 5 absent. We have a quorum, and I'd like from the council to make a motion, and I'll need a second, to appoint Alderman Mulliner to preside over the meeting tonight as Mayor Pro Tem. Do I have someone move? Alderman Dunn, second by Polumsky. Voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. The motion carries. Mayor Pro Tem, here's the gavel.
I don't know why you handled that well.
Thank you. Item number 2 is, does anyone have any written communications from the public that they'd like to present to the clerk? If you do, bring it up now, please.
Are you talking?
Thank you. Is there anything else? That will be duplicated and supplied to the council for at the next meeting. Next is public forum. As we all know, the next public forum is an opportunity for the public to address the council. There'll be 3 minutes for each person to address the council. We have a couple of people who have signed in. Clerk Spencer.
Okay, I'll start with Claude Pagash, 566 West Gladys.
My name is Claude Pogach, 566 West Gladys. It's in regards to this Feinzel that's on the agenda for tonight. I listened to the discussion last week and walked away, and after some time I started considering something. We seem to spend an awful lot of money on marketing. Feinzel, the Elmhurst Chamber of Commerce. We got a couple gentlemen that are hired by the city. Supposedly they go walking around talking to businessmen and all that. And I said to myself, you know, if you kind of add up all these contracts, there's about $400,000 there. But when aldermen ask, what are these people accomplishing, there seems to be a hue and cry of, why, it'd be very expensive to have a survey go out to see if they're accomplishing anything. And for whatever reason, their contracts always come up. Never hesitation, but any discussion on what they accomplish seems to always want to get buried. So I think before you get this Feinzel contract voted in, maybe you ought to have them appear just so we can make sure they exist. I hate to be spending all this money. In regards to one other thing, it's this parking garage. I had the opportunity of reading the paper, and I was mistaken. We spent over $5 million down there, and what we got is an empty lot. I got a question for this council and for the city administration. We got a partner. And partners generally kind of split expenses, don't they? You think, even though the council doesn't answer any questions no matter what, place could be on fire and you guys wouldn't say where the fire extinguishers are. But do you think in this case we could find out just how much our partners have contributed to this better than $5 million other than their names? I'd appreciate it. And this Fenzel and this marketing, maybe I ought to hold off on it until they make an appearance to kind of let you all know what they actually do, besides having coffee and donuts in Elmhurst. We appreciate it. The reason I'm doing all this is very simple.
10
I
seconds.
spend over $5 million for a piece of property, but the council couldn't put $200,000 aside when they might have had to pay back Elmhurst Hospital.
Thank you.
Tamara Brenner, 137 North Caroline Avenue.
Tamara Brenner, 137 North Caroline. So I was pleased to learn that the Addison Corridor Development 1 LLC has withdrawn its application to the Zoning Commission to build a 6-story building, combined parking, office, and retail building. That is now off the table, as I understand it. Still waiting for a formal announcement from the city about this, if they're planning on doing that. It was mentioned briefly in the zoning committee, DPZ committee last week, I think partly because of my question about it. I did finally see the letter about this withdrawal. It was given to me 5 days after I asked for it, even though it was one piece of paper that should have been readily available to the city. It was posted on board docs eventually, and it is available to the public now. That took a couple weeks. It's about time this happened. It seemed like the right thing to have happen after the Zoning Commission's report, which was very negative about the proposal. Took two extra months. What I don't know now is what's happening next. We have no idea where anybody stands on this project. We have no idea who's even in charge of the project. I know from a report I read in the Trib that a representative of Arco Murray said that they were waiting for direction from the city. The zoning committee chairman said he was waiting for a decision by the developer, so it's unclear who is in charge or which party is the cart and which part's the horse. So I'm really interested to hear from the city where things stand now and what is going to be the process from here. Again, the city spent $5 million plus so far, and that doesn't include anything towards the building itself. I'm kind of interested in the 2 referrals by Alderman Mulliner on tonight's agenda, which seem like they might intersect with the Addison Garage project, the zoning review of the downtown core as well as the industrial park core. Those are really good. I'd be interested to hear how those progress through the DPZ committee. 3-month time frame for a development review. That's going to be interesting to see if anything happens on that sort of time frame. That'd be great. And the last thing I want to mention tonight is the Fine-Salt contract also, which is coming for this final approval for the 5 months. Ms. Sullivan gave me an opportunity to look at the letter she submitted to the city clerk just now, and I concur with what she says in there when you guys get a chance to read it when you all are submitted copies. I'm opposed to this contract. I think the city can do a lot better job in marketing itself than what they're getting through that company. Thanks.
Thank you.
The last person I have that signed in tonight is Kathleen Sullivan, 133 Pine Street.
Kathleen Sullivan, 133 Pine Street. Today is August, I think, 5th. That would make it 3 years, 1 week, 5 days since the flooding events of July 2010 that made me a regular attender here. In that time, we have yet to do really any projects to remedy the storm water situations in Elmhurst, Illinois. And so I didn't think we should go past an anniversary without at least marking it. One of the things that I do notice, though, is we do have a lot of other spending that we have. On tonight's agenda alone, there's over $400,000 of projects, not counting the North York project, on the agenda that is likely to go past the agenda with little comment, if any. Maybe we do need slabjacking, maybe we do need trucks, okay? But maybe we don't need them as quickly. Maybe we need ways to be able to fund the problems to remedy the situations in our neighborhoods, because those problems still exist, and we spent not $1 really toward fixing those problems. We've spent $1 million on engineering, but nothing on projects to fix stormwater in this town. This is why I always get upset when I see any spending that I think is unnecessary. I specifically have called out Fines All Marketing and the Explore Elmhurst page since the April events of this year. The reason I brought them up repeatedly, and why I'm going to bring them up again tonight, was the most horrifying thing that I saw with regards to marketing efforts by this group this past weekend. On Friday night, they put a post out there that Facebook uses as instructions for novice marketers on how to get more likes on their page. It's something meant for people who run little clubs and organizations on how you might want to get more people to like it. You invite your friends who are members of the organization to the page, things like that, or people who might like that type of thing if you have a small business or something. A friend of mine who's an author went and got all his friends to like it, so he looked more popular when people who are interested in paranormal activities went to like it. That's not my type of reading, but it's a friend of mine who's the author. The fact that this little thing that Facebook puts out there on how to boost it for novice marketers, it was included in instructions by the city of Elmhurst, how we, the taxpayers, and other people who follow the Explore Elmhurst page should do the job of Fines All Marketing for them this week, really says exactly what some of the people were trying to say a few weeks ago when the contract was discussed, which is it is about the quality of the work effort. It is. The quality of that work effort is poor. I'm glad that the contract that you're approving tonight's only 5 months, and I encourage you to start looking for their replacement today. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who is interested in saying anything? Seeing none, we'll move on to announcements. Does anyone on the council have an announcement? Seeing no announcements, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Does anyone have any item that they'd like to remove from the consent agenda? Alderman Braham?
Yes, thank you. Item 5.13.
Anybody else? Alderman Gutenkopf?
5.20, please.
Does anyone else have any item they'd like to remove? Seeing none, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented, minus items 5.13 and 5.20. Alderman Dieter? Alderman Braham? Call the...
Okay. Deuter.
Aye.
Graham.
Aye.
Pipskin, absent. York, absent. Levin.
Aye.
Healy, absent. Hunquist.
Aye.
Kennedy, absent. Mulliner,
Aye.
Wagner, absent. Gutenkopf,
Aye.
Dunn,
Aye.
Leader,
Aye.
Polumsky.
Aye.
9 ayes, 0 nays, 5 absent.
That item passes. We'll move on to the first item that was removed, 5.13. We'll give the clerk a moment to find that item and read the recommendation, please.
I've got it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is therefore the recommendation of the Public Affairs and Safety Committee that the city attorney be authorized to draft the appropriate ordinance for the installation of yield signs at the intersection of Cedar Avenue, Barclay Court at Madison Street. Signed by Patrick Wagner, Chairman, Norm Leader, Vice Chairman, unsigned due to an absence from the committee meeting, Michael Honquist.
I ask for a motion to approve. Alderman Leader, a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Second. Discussion.
Was that Bram or Honquist?
Alderman Leader?
I'll start it. In response to a request from neighborhood residents and Alderman Kennedy, who lives in the cul-de-sac, The city's engineering division performed an intersection study, and based on only moderate sight lines on all approaches and a short cul-de-sac, engineering determined that yield signs are warranted. Each request for a stop or a yield sign must be judged on its merits, but always the request of local residents who are most familiar with local conditions must be honored above hard and fast rules. The main justification for civil government is the protection of the health, welfare, and safety of our citizens. Certainly, traffic controlling devices are an important part of that definition. When we must choose which course of action to follow, let us always choose the safety of our residents and constituents above all other considerations. Let us always err on the side of safety. So I would ask that the council support this as written.
Thank you. Alderman Braham?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As in the past, I take traffic control devices very seriously. I was on the Public Affairs and Safety Committee for, I don't know, approximately 7-8 years, if not longer than that. So I do understand that the needs of the residents, the requests of the residents, but I also understand that the requests of the residents aren't always appropriate to follow through with. And that's why we have city engineers, and that's why we have a consultant on staff to do that evaluation. I do agree with Vice Chair Alderman Leader in regards to what the report says. The city's engineering division did perform this study and is making the recommendation or feels that the yield signs are warranted. But there's the data that I've seen comparing it to the standard that we go by, the MUTCD, and those of you who've been in the audience before have heard me mention that acronym, Manual Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which is a federal guideline, which was adopted by Illinois, which was adopted by the city of Elmhurst. That's part of our policy. That is what we're supposed to follow when we're making these decisions, so these decisions aren't political, or these decisions aren't for favors, or these decisions aren't because I go to school with your, or my kid goes to school with your kid. I'm not saying any of those are applying here, but what I am saying is it is to keep us on the straight and narrow and only evaluating traffic control requests per statistics, per facts, compared to any other possible reason. And I want to touch on that. First off, I was a little bit confused, and I want to make sure that the report is correct. The meeting minutes for this discussion is a one-liner, and the one-liner says, Chairman Wagner asked about this sign and where it would be installed. The signs will be installed for east and westbound Madison. Report was signed. The report says that the signs are being installed north and south. I believe the report is correct, and if that is the case, I would just like to make sure that we update the minutes accordingly. Unless I hear from the committee, I will go along with the report. In regards to the information that was provided by city staff, it states that it has moderate sight distance, which is approximately 70 feet, pretty significant for a residential street. Accident history, absolutely none in the past 3 years. These two streets, Cedar Avenue turns into Barclay, Barclay turns into Cedar Avenue, and Madison, that intersection, both local streets, otherwise known as residential streets. Speed limit, 25 miles per hour, that's typical. Average daily traffic counts, both streets are almost identical, varying by marginal numbers, approximately 100, give or take 10 to 15. As I said, no accidents. The information that I guess is supporting the need for yield signs at this intersection is this ITE journal dated April 1995. Well, the MUTCD is up to date on a yearly basis, and that's our guideline, so we continue to refer, and I've made this request in the past. We didn't include this article in our policy like we do the MUTCD, but we continually refer to a 1995 professional journal. And the reference on here is about Table 5. Table 5 offers some proposed definition of site distances, and identifies types of control that may be, not shall be, but may be considered. And it's circled with a nice arrow, which I think it's just almost a photocopy of ones in the past, of this intersection meets moderate. Moderate meaning site distance of 70 to 110 feet. Above that, though, and I think this is where we take this article out of context, is Table 4. We don't reference Table 4 ever, but Table 4 says, for a cross-type intersection, or you could contemplate and debate that this is a T intersection, a local-to-local street, there's an X under none, meaning no control device is applicable. Under a T intersection, local-to-local street, again, an X is under none, where no control device is warranted. But we neglect that table, we ignore that table, and we only look at the table that says that there's moderate sight distance. Now I want to reference the MUTCD, and this is what I go by. This is what our policy says we should be going by. Yes, it's a guideline, but in this guideline it does state that only if there's engineering judgment should we waiver. And I have not seen in the report or the recommendation that any engineering judgment states that there should be any change. In here, and I've been asked, because I have spoken with aldermen, I have contacted every single one of the aldermen on the committee earlier this morning between 7 and 8 a.m. Via email. And I appreciate the responses out of the 2 aldermen that did respond to me. But in this guideline, and hopefully when you got your driver's license, you're well aware of that, because otherwise you probably shouldn't be getting your driver's license if you're not aware of this little known fact, I guess. When 2 vehicles approach an intersection from different streets or highways at approximately the same time, the right-of-way rule requires the driver of the vehicle on the left to yield the right-of-way to the vehicle on the right. The right-of-way can be modified, stress the word modified, at through streets or highways by placing yield signs and or stop signs through on one or more of the approaches. In this case, we're putting yield signs essentially to do what's already done. The uncontrolled intersection, according to when you took the test for your driver's license, according to the MUTCD, states that we should be yielding to the vehicle on the right. In regards to yield signs, in the MUTCD again, it says yield or stop signs should not be used for speed control. We've talked about that on and on and on. The guidance in here states engineering judgment should be used to establish intersection control. The following factors should be considered: vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian traffic volumes on all approaches, which we already established is low. Number and angle of approaches. Approach speeds, which we have no data, at least in this report, to reflect that. Sight distance available on each approach, which is moderate at the worst. Reported crash experience, none in 3 years. So I continue to ask myself, what problem are we trying to solve here? One of the streets in this intersection is a cul-de-sac. Really? We need to control this mass of traffic where one of the streets is a cul-de-sac? We've had absolutely no accidents whatsoever. It doesn't meet, once again, any of the MUTC guidelines. In the report itself, it doesn't state that any engineering judgment has been utilized other than there's a slight 8-foot offset. But that 8-foot offset isn't justified on what problem that brings to the table, because it brings none. There's clear line of sight, there's no accidents, there's no problem stated in the request, there's no problem stated in the report that we're even solving here. So I'm asking my colleagues, my fellow aldermen, what are we trying to solve? Because if one of you could please tell me the issue we're trying to solve here, maybe I will go along with this report. But at this point in time, I see no reason, none whatsoever, to add yield signs. You might ask yourself, well, what does it hurt? Well, what are we solving? What's the point of putting something where it doesn't belong? The referral itself states, when I tell the cab drivers that this intersection is uncontrolled, they all say that there should be a yield sign on northbound Cedar as it ultimately enters Barclay Court. I don't see a problem here. So I ask you all to please do not support this recommendation. We're putting yields, the request is to put yield signs up to solve no problem. There's no accidents, there's no speeding, because that would be stated. It mentions that it mentions residents made this request. There's no petition to say that any residents made this request. According to the meeting minutes, at least in the meeting minutes, it didn't state that there was a conference room full of residents demanding that yield signs be put here. So once again, I ask, please do not support this report. Please support the MUTCD as it's written, and as we, as an elected body, have voted, that should be our policy, and we should move on that and that alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Braham. Just one clarification based on one of the comments that you made, just so we make sure that everybody's clear on this. The report is actually accurate. It is the northbound and southbound approaches. So there was a Scribner's error in the actual minutes, and they should be corrected to reflect that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other comments or discussion on this item? Alderman Gutenkopf?
I think Alderman Braham has covered pretty much all the reasons why we shouldn't be supporting this, and I've said this before, and I'm gonna keep hammering at this. We've adopted a particular set of guidelines that are uniform across the country. The guidelines are uniform to assist drivers and pedestrians and bicyclists and anybody else using our roadways understand how they're supposed to behave. And when we start to add unwarranted traffic control devices, it confuses the issue because it's an unexpected sign, it's an unexpected device, and it makes it more difficult for people. They don't see things they don't expect because we've all been trained on how to use our roadways and how signs go in and where lights hang, and it matters. These kinds of things sound small, but they matter. And when we start to add extra devices, we muck up the system in a way that is unwarranted. We don't need to spend the money to put a sign in here. I don't support it. I don't see a strong justification for it. And I'm a little concerned at, this sort of sense of elected official presenting an argument that I don't see as backed up by the community. So I am in agreement with Alderman Braham.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Alderman Levin?
A question for Alderman Leader. I see there was an engineering study done, and I understand Alderman Braham is quoting from the manual, suggesting that it did not, that this request is not warranted by the manual, but did the traffic engineer from our city find that it was or was not dictated by the manual, and if not, was it decided outside of the constraints of the manual?
I have to believe that our very competent city engineering department took all of those factors into consideration before making their recommendation. After all, they are professionals. We are not. We are here to set policy, but we are not experts in this field. So in this case, what I am doing and what those of us who were there that day on the committee, we were bound by the city engineering report, the experts.
Follow up?
Thank you.
I wish I knew the answer to that, because Alderman Braham has taken me to task visually for looking at, for how we decide as a community when signs go in or not. And I had assumed, but if it's not true, that the MUTCD was followed, is a different scenario than if it's completely outside of that. And I don't know if anyone else knows the answer to that question.
City Manager?
Thank you. As Alderman Brand pointed out, there's 2 tables in the report. One of them is Table 5, where our staff indicates that a yield sign is appropriate in this application. And if Director Hughes maybe wants to comment on that, my understanding is that the engineering department did review this, and it did meet the warrants. And as Alderman Brand said, there's a may in there, not a shall, but the may allows it if necessary.
Thank you.
Understanding.
Alderman Bram?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Alderman Levin's question, the report from our city staff, under conclusions, it does state yield signs are warranted based on moderate sight distance and short cul-de-sac. I'm not sure how a short cul-de-sac would warrant a yield sign. I actually think that would be more from the standpoint of against putting any traffic control devices there. But that's what the conclusion says on page 2 of the summary that I received. The table that City Manager Grabowski referenced is from that journal, a professional journal, the ITE journal, which I'm not sure what ITE stands for. I'm sure engineer somewhere in there, something engineer journal, dated from 95. That is one table in there, one table only. The conclusion doesn't state that it followed the MUTCD or not, but I was mistaken when I was quoting earlier from the MUTCD. The line items I was referring to are the right-of-way. The yield sign application, section 2B09, yield sign applications, it says yield signs may be installed. And I'll just read to you item D, as in David. At an intersection where a special problem exists and where engineering judgment indicates the problem to be susceptible to correction by the use of the yield sign. That's one of the parts of my argument here. What's the problem? What are we trying to correct? If there is engineering judgment made, what are we correcting? We don't have any evidence, at least in the report, I wasn't a part of the committee meeting, that says that there's any problem. There's reports no accidents in 3 years. I didn't hear any public outcry. I don't know what we're trying to correct here. Why would we go outside the guidelines and utilize engineering judgment when I don't even know what the problem is to begin with? The other thing I do want to state is that if I was out there this morning, I did drive it in every which way possible, all 4 directions. I didn't see a line of sight issue personally. The intersection to the east is a 2-way stop. It's a 2-way stop because it's an L. That's the only ways you can stop on an L-type intersection. The intersection to the west is a 4-way stop. I'm not going to even go if that's justified or not. It's there, it's installed. But we have both intersections on either side of the one that's in this report today with, other than a stoplight, the most residential major control devices. And now we're talking about putting additional ones here in this middle intersection. I just go back to the fact of, I don't see a problem. I don't see what we're trying to correct. I don't see why engineering judgment would even come into play here.
Thank you. Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not even sure where to begin. The information that we were given and the information that the committee was given doesn't include a great deal of reporting from city staff. I'm sure that city staff are doing their job. I have no doubt of that. My question is, what policy are we setting? Because it is our job to set policies, Alderman Leader said, and that's what we're doing. By approving this, we're setting policy for how we decide about where we're putting signs in. That's our job. So I tried to look at this cited page that was included with the report, because if one only looks at the table, it appears that this is a table that's offering guidelines for how to make decisions about where to put signs. But when you read the page that we received from the article, it appears that this is taken from a study that's an analysis of how signs operate in a residential setting, and not a policy document to tell us where to put signs, but rather an analysis of how signs function in some setting in Los Angeles. So it's one thing to say, I understand how these signs are functioning in this community, and this table is a summary of that function. And it's another thing to make a big leap from function summary to policy document. And I'm kind of surprised that we would be using this research information in this way. I just think it's unfathomable, and without the rest of the research report from the journal, I'm not really sure how we can draw conclusions from it, or say that it's supposed to guide us in any way. So we don't have any comments from staff about how the MUTCD applies here. I'm left to my own personal knowledge of the document, having used that in my work in the past, and my understanding of what other aldermen are saying, aldermen who've used the document in their work. So I just think it's overkill to put this sign in, and I just don't see why we would do it.
Thank you. Any other further discussion?
I may regret this, but,
Alderman Dean.
oh, go ahead.
You go ahead.
I already spoke once. Alderman.
This is, thank you, Mayor, this is it's newer subjects to me, so I don't have the history that some of the other council members have about how this has been used in the past. So one of my questions is, this table, I know I have seen it before. I don't know if it's just been in earlier reports on this particular proposed yield sign. So a question I have for my colleagues is, has this table been used before? Is there some precedence that we have used this to set policies? Kind of one question, and if I can add one other thing to that, in trying to get up to speed, I did talk to one of the city engineers earlier today to understand a little more of the background on this, and I will try to share what she shared with me, which and if city manager Grabowski has something to clarify. But what I understood is that the MUTCD, if it's not completely silent, it doesn't have as much information about what devices are appropriate on local streets, that it's mainly intended for larger arterial streets. And so that in the absence of more guidelines on smaller, less traveled residential streets, they look to something like this. So that's what I understood. That was their justification. She, when I talked to her, assured me that she felt like this is an appropriate use. So I'll share that just for folks who didn't have a chance to talk to her earlier.
I'd like to ask Public Works Director Hughes to speak to this.
Yeah, just a little follow-up. In fact, Alderman Deuter was quite right. Engineering judgment does fall within the guidelines. It's an allowable use, but in both Alderman Gutenkopf and Bram are correct that the city does have a policy to follow the MUTCD. The problem with the MUTCD, it's over 1,000 pages, and it covers everything from signage to take you into a national park, to airports, to intersections like North Avenue and 290 and 294. And all the way down to local roads. It is not very deep on local roads. They the Federal Highway Administration sort of use that as, an also ran. So it covers it, local, but it doesn't cover it in depth, and it doesn't cover it in a real life situation. That's what that study was attempting to do. So for the last 25 years, ITE, the Institute for Transportation Engineers, has tried to bolster that void in the MUTCD, the lack of really good study and in control. So that's where the rub comes in. It isn't part of the MUTCD yet, but engineering staffs across the country have utilized. Chicago wrote their own. They just said, we're going to do this, and they have their own background behind it and why they do what they do, because their situation's quite different than ours. They have cars parked right up to the corner all over the place. So that's what the studies and the policy box report try to infill some of the gap that exists in the MUTCD. I don't know if that helps or not, but. And to follow up with Alderman Deuter, I did talk with City Engineer Taberry today, and the staff's recommendation was based on site distance out there. It warranted the two-way yield.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Alderman Bram?
Thank you. And I just want to thank Director Mike Hughes for commenting. I'll just answer Alderman Deuter's question to the council as a whole. This section of the journal has been utilized in reports within the last, I don't know, I'm going to guesstimate here 5 years out of my 12-year tenure here. I personally am concerned if, I know government moves slow, but if since this study has been written in 1995 and we're in 2013, if we're not able to bolster the MUTCD after 18 years, I'm concerned for us as a nation on something so simple. And that's speaking from a federal level, nothing from a city level. But I am confused by why we need a journal article or study or what have you to assist us when yield signs are not part of, well, I guess they are kind of part of the highway, but yield signs and stop signs are integral to our residential streets, period, bar none. That's where they're located. And the MUTCD clearly states and defines guidelines, criteria on when stop signs and yield signs should be considered and applicable. So to me, I've always looked at, and when this journal article did appear, I did question it at that time, so this is nothing new. I don't know why we would need anything in addition to the MUTCD when it sets out the criteria for us. I do agree with engineering judgment, because no matter how much you write, no matter how many laws you have, you're not going to be able to cover all bases. So I do agree that engineering judgment is needed in certain cases. I guess where I don't agree in this particular case, that any engineering judgment is needed because it meets really none of the criteria in the MUTCD, where therefore we would reference any external references like this. And this external reference, we're referencing a table out of this big article, a table, that's it. Not the table above it that actually says that no yield sign should be warranted, but a table that talks about site distance. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, can we call a roll?
Leader.
Aye.
Conquest.
Aye.
Kennedy, absent. Mulliner.
Aye.
Wagner, absent. Gutenkopf.
No.
Deuter.
Aye.
Dunn.
Aye.
Polumsky.
Aye.
Bram.
No.
Hipskin, absent. York, absent. Levin.
Aye.
Ely, absent. Looks like 7 ayes, 2 nays, and 5 absent.
7 ayes, 2 nays, the item passes. On to 5.20. Clerk Spencer, could you read the title?
This is a resolution authorizing the execution of a consulting agreement between Feinsall Community Marketing and the City of Elmhurst, Illinois.
I need a motion to put this into play. Alderman Levin, Alderman Polumsky. Alderman Levin, would you like to speak to this?
I think it's been presented before. This was a item that was discussed at 2 DPZ meetings, and we asked them to come back for additional information. I think it was debated at length last meeting, so I have nothing further to add to it.
Thank you. Alderman Gutenkopf?
I just wanted to make a comment about this, that I think it's important to remind everyone that the 5-month contract that will end at the end of this current fiscal year is intended to continue some of the ongoing work and give us as a council the opportunity to evaluate this entire marketing process, and to decide what is going to be the best for the city moving forward, rather than terminate some ongoing work. And so questions of efficacy are important and should be part of our considerations as we look toward how we're going to identify what we need done as a city and who's going to do it. And that's pretty much the only comment I think I need to make.
Thank you. Anyone else? Alderman Braham?
This is going to be a question that I hope that the city manager could touch on in reports and recommendations. I guess it's only been a handful of weeks, but if we could hear a report on where, well, maybe this isn't appropriate. Maybe this is more of a committee chair question, so I will take that back. I cannot ask the city manager. It's a committee chair question. In regards to the referral by Alderman Palomsky and Alderman York to make sure that we're heading down the path to have this in place before the end of the year.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, Clerk Spencer, please call the roll.
Levin.
Aye.
Palomsky.
Aye.
Graham.
Aye.
Hipskin, absent. York, absent. Healy, absent. Conquest.
Aye.
Kennedy, absent. Mulliner.
Aye.
Wagner, absent. Gudenkauf.
Aye.
Deuter.
Aye.
Dunn.
Aye.
Leader.
Aye.
9 ayes, 0 nays, 5 absent.
9 ayes, 0 nays. The item passes. Just to make sure that the record reflects this, it passed with an exceeding 8 votes. A resolution must pass with at least 8 votes, just to make sure everybody understands that. That concludes the consent agenda. Now we move on to reports and recommendations from appointed and elected officials. City Manager.
Thank you. I have 2 items to report tonight. The first is an update that the RFPs for the Han Street project are due Monday, next Monday. So we'll be collecting those. I know Assistant Manager Kopp has been on the phone with a number of different firms who are looking to submit for that. And the second item that I have is a reminder that myself and staff, along with representatives from Burke Engineering, will be presenting to the Park District Board on August 14th. That's a Wednesday at 7 p.m. at the Abbey. They're moving the meeting from the Park District office to the Abbey that night. So feel free to come in and listen if you would like to. That's all that I have.
Thank you. Any other reports or recommendations? Seeing none, other business? Does anyone have any other business? Seeing none, I need a motion for adjournment. Alderman Braham. Alderman Deuter. All in favor, say aye.
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 Meeting adjourned.